Hey, DirtFarmerJay here from DirtFarmerJay.com. I'm going to talk to you today in this brief episode about Russian olives, their characteristics, and if you decide to control them, which I have, how to do that effectively. Stay tuned. Hey, DirtFarmerJay from DirtFarmerJay.com. You know, if you have Russian olives showing up in your yardscape like we do, this one's in one of our beds right here, and you want to know whether or not you should keep it or not, I want you to watch here briefly about some of the characteristics about Russian olives and how to control them. Now, Russian olives have become very commonplace across the United States, especially in the Midwest and out in the West. And they're known by other things, such as wild olive, silverberry, or oleaster. But they're all describing the same thing. A cultivar of trees that is of the olive family, has olive-like characteristics and coloration. You can see by the leaves, it's more an olive or silver leaf type of tree. And it has several other characteristics that we're going to go through so you can make a decision. And then I'm going to show you very quickly how we have found out how to control this pretty much foolproof every single time. Now, a couple things that I want to mention to you. First of all, some people want to use, and they have been used historically for yardscapes in ornamental settings. And so some people really like them. And here you can kind of see them growing in a suburban area among other trees. And something you'll notice right away is the coloration and shape of the trunks, some of the leaf habits, and also notice that the coloration is very different than what we typically think about greenery in a yard. Like I said, they're called silver leaf or olive leaf type of coloration, and so they're going to look a lot different than most of the trees surrounding them. Number two, they grow to be about typically 30 foot tall, which is about 10 meters. Although depending on where they're grown and whether they're cultivated, what kind of resources are given to them, they can grow another half again as tall as that, or sometimes it'll be as short as about 15 foot or about 5 meters tall. So there's some different growth habits. Now, one thing that I found very undesirable right off is they tend to branch heavily at the base. So you don't end up with this nice single stem tree usually with its typical bottom horizon and nice canopy above. What you end up with is what looks like pretty much like a very large, kind of unruly shrub. And you can see that right here growing out the bottom of a tree, just located out in the middle of a field someplace. This is untended. And so you can see this is fairly typical how they generally look. Now, they have a desire, if you want to put it that way, for ever increasing range. They continue to always look for new places to grow, and you can see them right along roadsides growing in stands like this, or in along the edge of a managed pasture. Boy, they're waiting right there. If they could to get into that pasture, they would. Or just out in the middle of, let's say, a dry farmed pasture where it's not irrigated, but you can see several seedlings here starting to pop up. And also in suburbia, they look for all sorts of cracks and crevices to grow here. You can see one right along a vinyl fence line where a seed has gotten down in the bottom and is starting to grow. And if that is not controlled, it will grow up and displace the fence and then start to multiply. So it's something you have to watch out for. Something also, another characteristic of the Russian olive is it has a comparatively shallow root system. About, I'd say the vast majority of the root system grows in the top 3 feet of the soil. They grow laterally, kind of like out in a saucer shape. And here you can see where some farmers along the edge of a roadside were ripping out some of the Russian olives here. And here you can see one that's pulled over. And what you're looking at, it's sticking up in the ear, is actually one of the main roots, very shallow, going sideways if it was down in the soil. But also notice around the bottom, even though that thing's been ripped mostly out of the ground, look how hard it's fighting to survive. It's already putting out shoots with something that's probably ripped out of the ground probably 6 months ago. So it's going on there. Because it does have a fairly shallow root system, it's a very thirsty tree. It doesn't have a lot of deep tap roots. It counts on a lot of surface moisture and it readily takes from everything else around it along riparian areas, along riversides and areas like that of streams. It can imbibe a mature tree up to 75 gallons a day in water. So envision a 55-gallon drum, something like that, 1.5 of those that tree is consuming daily. They're a very thirsty tree with that shallow root system. And another thing, it takes a lot of work on your side if you're going to use it as a yardscape tree is ongoing pruning, not just at the base to keep it cleaned up, but also some up in the canopy, because you get a lot of crisscross growth, a lot of deadfall that starts to occur, and it looks pretty untended. And even in one that's meant to be in the middle of a landscape, you can still see where things are needing to be tended to. So note, that's what you're signing up for if you do let a Russian olive stand of trees or a single tree starts to grow there. Now, one of the most daunting things about these trees, though, and although you can't see it readily here right now, just when I reached out and touched that, I got a thorn right in the finger. Even in its juvenile stage, right at the end of some of these, there is a very sharp needle that my fingertip is hitting. And you can see in this clip also just what they look like. They are something like, 1 inch to 2 inches long, mature, or 2.5 to 5 centimeters long. And they are all over in the tree. So they're not friendly. If you're trying to grow them in an area, you've got kids and want tree climbing trees, or you want an area that you can work through, a wood lot and all that, then you got to keep in mind those are there. How did the trees get here? Well, they were originally imported for ornamental purposes. Their native range land is in Western Asia, including where Pakistan and India, southern Russia, Iran, all those areas of where they're very native to, what were brought over. And the U.S. government actually used them for a period of time for the positive characteristics they wanted. They're very aggressive in putting down root systems, so they're very good for soil conservation, soil stabilization, also wild range or habitat for animals, snow breaks, windbreaks, all those sort of things. But with all of those all those positives come trade-offs. And now we've got the unintended consequences, so much so that there are some states and municipalities, jurisdictions that are saying, no, you can't do it, or there's heavily restrictions on it, or you can't have them near waterways and so forth. As a matter of fact, New Mexico and Colorado have both listed them on their noxious weed or highly invasive weed listing. And you can look down below in the description. I've given you a couple more great links where you can go. If you're super geeky, you can read a big old research paper put out by none less than the U.S. government, a big old term paper on all things related to Russian olive. And then there's another link there for the USDA on their listing about the Russian olive too. You can look there. There's always more things than that. So how do we control them? If we make the decision we're not going to put them in our yard, how do we control them? Well, let me tell you about that in just a second. If you're finding this video and this kind of information be helpful for you, won't you do me a quick favor? Won't you subscribe? And when you do, ring the bell so you'll be notified of ongoing videos. And check out our store over at DirtFarmerJay.com for great extended content, blogs, as well as our merchandise stores for hats, shirts, coffee mugs, and the like. We really appreciate the support. So what's the secret to controlling these kind of trees? What I use to control them is glyphosate. Glyphosate is one of the most widely applied non-selective herbicides. And when we say non-selective, it's also systemic, meaning it gets into the system of the plant that it's controlling and kills off the ability of proteins to be transmitted to build along the root surfaces, takes out the roots so no new tissue can grow in the plant and the plant dies. It takes some time to do that. It's a systemic, in that way it's in the system, but it also is non-selective. So you got to be careful where you're applying it. For instance, if you're trying to apply or take care of weeds in your lawn, you're not going to apply it all over your lawn because it'll take out the lawn also. But we use this straight, undiluted when we're taking out saplings. Now, let me show you how we're going to do that. We're actually going to take out this sapling and apply it, and then I'm going to show you the results of a much larger one that we did last year that a year later we have no regrowth. So let's get to it. All right, so what we're going to do right here, being very careful because there are a lot of thorns in this, I'm going to take a pruner. I'm going to cut this as close to the ground as I can. And when I do, I now have this stump, which you can't really see very well. But what you want to do is immediately apply undiluted herbicide directly on it within a few minutes of clipping it. And the reason is, envision the ends of all those tissues as open straws that haven't started to desiccate or dry out or collapse yet. So what you're going to do is you're going to pour this right on the top of that and just let it set. You don't need very much, just coat it multiple times and it's going to pull that in and then take it out. Now, does it work? Here you can see a shot of a much larger sapling that had grown up and hidden among some other trees. When we discovered it, it was that big around, and I had to cut it down at the soil line, soaked it with the herbicide, and here you can see a year later, it has not come back. So if you decide that indeed you do not want to have Russian olive in your yard, and we sure don't for all the reasons we've told about, now you know how to go about it. Did you know there's a great way to green up your lawn in the spring, but doing it in the fall by overseeding? You can watch this video right here, and I'll take you step by step how to overseed in the fall, let the seeds settle in over the winter, and get that really soaked in for a lush, beautiful green lawn in all those sparse areas. Until the next time, this is Dirt Farmer Jay from DirtFarmerJay.com.